This is CBC Winnipeg News.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. In just a couple of minutes, the provincial leaders' debate will get underway. But first, here are the day's headlines. A man was found dead in a home in the 200 block of Hazelton Drive in the North Inkster industrial neighborhood yesterday. The body of 39-year-old Sukdul Singh Gill was found after the tactical unit was called there around 10 in the morning. Police are looking for anyone with surveillance video or information. No arrests have been made. A new poll suggests the NDP lead in Manitoba's election is getting larger. A probe research survey conducted earlier this month suggests 49% of voters favor the New Democrats, while 38% plan to vote Progressive Conservative, and 9% favor the Liberals. The poll of 1,000 adults was conducted online and over the phone. A random sample of that size has an error margin of 3%. The Manitoba Liberals are promising to do more to help seniors and other Manitobans save money on life-saving drugs. Leader Dougald Lamont says the program would cover diabetes medications, insulin pumps, glucose monitors, CPAP machines, as well as funding for drugs for cystic fibrosis and other emergency medications. The Liberals would also provide grants of up to $15,000 to make it easier for seniors to stay in their homes. The Progressive Conservatives are promising to create more addiction treatment spaces in Manitoba if they're elected. The party pledged to spend nearly $9 million on an additional 1,600 spaces over 2 years. It's not clear yet where those new spaces would be built. And the leader of the Green Party is urging Manitobans to elect a Green MLA to hold government accountable on climate change plans. Janine Gibson is running in the Wolseley constituency. She says Manitoba must reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 9% each year until 2030. Stay tuned now for the provincial leaders debate. We will bring you analysis of that debate starting at 7 on CBC Manitoba's website, YouTube channel, and on CBC Jam. Our next local newscast is at 11.
All of these things are about growing our economy here in Manitoba and putting us on the world map.
You want to build this province? This is how you build it.
That's why Manitoba Liberals are the only real choice for real change in this election.
Manitoba's 43rd provincial election is just 12 days away. Tonight, the leaders face off in hopes of winning your vote. Welcome to the 2023 Manitoba Provincial Leaders Debate. My name is Agnes Welch. I'm a partner at Probe Research. Let's get started by introducing the party leaders. First, New Democratic Party leader Wab Kinew, Conservative Party leader Heather Stephenson, and Liberal Party leader Dougald Lamont. I also want to introduce our 3 journalists. They are here to question the leaders on healthcare, on crime and safety, and affordability and the economy. From the CBC, Ian Froese. From Global News, Marnie Blunt. And from CTV, Jeff Keel. Here is how the debate will go. We will start with opening statements and then one-on-one questions where the leaders can interact. Then our 3 journalists will ask those big issue questions of each leader. The leaders will also again have the opportunity to ask pointed questions of each other on those issues. We'll then finish with short closing statements. Leaders, let's be respectful tonight of each other, of the time clock, so that Manitobans can really hear your ideas. We will start with 1-minute opening statements. NDP leader Wab Kinew will go first.
How do you do? I'm Wab Kinew. This election is about health care. We need to change the government in this province so that we can fix our health care system. I think we all know that the folks who broke our healthcare system will not be the ones to fix it. The worst thing that Heather Stephenson and the PCs did to our healthcare was to close the emergency rooms. I don't think too many of us understood how having to drive further was going to get you seen quicker. We have a plan to fix it. Let me be clear, this is going to be hard work. It has to start with staffing up the healthcare system, and then, once the staffing is stabilized, 2 years from now, we put shovels into the ground to build a new ER starting in South Winnipeg. This is why I'm asking for your support this year. You can vote to change the government. You can vote to fix healthcare. And it's with the greatest of humility that I'm asking for you to vote for the Manitoba NDP.
Thank you. Next, Liberal leader Dougald Lamont.
Thank you very much. I'm Dougald Lamont. I'm leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party. You know, this election is really about change. You know, we've had a number of leaders' debates. Advance polls open soon, and neither of my opponents have actually released a plan. We released our full and costed platform on the second day of the election, so you would know exactly where we stand. And our platform has been described as the only fiscally sane plan. The other parties aren't really fiscally conservative or even fiscally responsible. They're more fiscally delusional. Because the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives has said if these two parties keep their promises, they're going to have to cut. After 7 years of cuts and freezes, the NDP and PCs are offering more of the same. They're offering to keep sending checks to billionaires as they objected to previously. And I know the main reason that people are considering voting either NDP and PCs is to stop the other one from getting in. This is still a democracy. You have a choice. You do not have to vote NDP to get rid of Heather Stephenson and the PCs. You can vote for Manitoba Liberals to stop both.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Last statement goes to Progressive Conservative leader Heather Stephenson.
Good evening, Manitobans. And like you, I love Manitoba and believe we can be the fastest growing, most competitive province on our way to 2 million people strong. What we are doing is working. With the third fastest growing economy in Canada and more Manitobans employed than ever before, we know when our economy is growing, every Manitoba benefits. We recognize there is more to do to help Manitobans make ends meet. And we are the only party fighting to make life more affordable for Manitobans. We're the only party fighting to heal healthcare, to make streets safer, to give parents more rights in schools, and to stop the NDP Liberal carbon tax. Our stable, experienced PC team is fighting for you. We've made significant progress. Imagine what we could do with 4 more years. Let's keep the momentum going together.
Thank you all. It's time now for our first question and answer segment. This is the part where each leader can pose a question of another leader of their choice. So a question, an answer, and a brief rebuttal, all in 2 minutes. The first question comes from Dougald Lamont.
Yep. Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Canoe. I think when you look at the last few months, your story keeps changing. You voted against the PC budget, and then you said you'd keep it. You said your party would never send money to billionaires, and then you said you'd keep doing it. You said you'd cut jobs at Shared Health, and then you said you wouldn't, and then you said you would again. And you've changed your story on ER timeline. So I believe in second chances, but I also think that some things are disqualifying to being Premier of Manitoba, and your story keeps changing. So given your record, how can Manitobans possibly trust you?
I've been working hard this entire election campaign to focus on what really matters. You, the people of Manitoba. We began our campaign by talking about lowering costs for you, the people of this province. And our plan will see us deliver a cut to the provincial gas tax. That'll save you 14 cents a litre every single time you gas up. At the same time, we're going to put incentives into place to help you make the switch to a more climate-friendly future when you're ready and when you can afford to do so. Chief among these measures is our idea of freezing hydro rates here in the province. And of course, in order to make hydro more affordable, we have to keep Manitoba Hydro public. Then, of course, healthcare was next on our agenda. This has to start with staffing. 300 more nurses to make up for the nurses cut by the PCs in Winnipeg over their time in office. And then we want to move to emergency rooms, new ERs to serve you and your family.
Lamont reply there.
Look, it is difficult to rely on what Mr. Canoe has said simply because he's completely reversed himself, especially when it comes to sending checks to billionaires. We're borrowing $453 million just this year, borrowing it. And we're sending checks to places like Cadillac Fairview, to the Koch brothers, and I know that because that's what Mr. Canoe said, and all of a sudden he's in favor of it. It's fiscally irresponsible, and I cannot understand why the NDP are doing it.
Thank you. Next question to Heather Stephenson.
Mr. Canoe, I want to ask you about your position on the calls for a search of the Prairie Green landfill. The feasibility study states that there are considerable risks, including asbestos and other toxic waste. Inhaling the fibers can cause cancer and other serious health issues. The report states, and I quote, "There are considerable risks." Why are you willing to put $184 million and Manitoba workers at risk for a search without a guarantee?
The PCs are trying to use this issue to divide us. And this is what it's been like throughout their time in office. They have picked winners and losers. In rural Manitoba, you've lost out when it comes to healthcare. In South Winnipeg, you lost your ER. And I fundamentally disagree with this approach. At this moment in our province's history, I think it's time for us to live up to that phrase, every child matters. Because to me, every person in this province matters. So yes, I'm going to invest in rural healthcare. Yes, I will build new ERs, and yes, I will search the landfill. And you know what? I will balance respect and dignity for these families while also being responsible with the public purse. But what I won't do is use wedge politics to try and score a few political points. In fact, I think it's very important for us to all agree that we don't have to agree on everything in order to work together on the big things like fixing healthcare.
As a leader and as Premier, you're faced with very difficult decisions every single day. And that's what we are talking about today. This was a very difficult decision to be made, but this will happen time and time again. And in this particular case, the answer had to be no. And I think it's unfortunate that Mr. Canoe didn't answer the question today. He is avoiding answering this question.
Thank you, Mrs. Stephenson. Mr. Canoe, next question is from you.
Well, we all know that this election hinges on healthcare. It's such a big priority in our province right now. That's why we've committed to building new emergency rooms, starting at the Victoria Hospital, once we have the staff resources to do so. People need them. Your family needs them. We know that the worst thing that Heather Stephenson and the PCs did during their time in office was close emergency rooms. We've all seen the impact since.
I'm waiting on a question. There we go.
My question for Heather Stephenson is, do you still think it was the right idea to close emergency rooms in Winnipeg?
Listen, healthcare didn't break overnight, and healthcare won't be fixed overnight with simple solutions that Mr. Canoe is talking about. Most of our challenges in our healthcare system have to do with human resources. And this is nothing new, nothing unique to Manitoba. It's something being faced right across the country. Everyone has challenges with this. But we've been taking action on this. $200 million and $400 million that we have invested in recruitment, retention, and training of healthcare professionals. We've already reached our goal of the 2,000 more healthcare professionals by the end of August this year. We recognize there's more work to be done, and we're continuing to do that work. We've added 400 nursing seats. We've recruited 300 international nurses. That's all going to be part of how we move forward together in healing our healthcare system.
Thank you. Quick rebuttal, Mr. Canoe.
Well, what you just heard there is you're not going to get more emergency rooms with the PCs. You're not going to have those services close to you and your family when you need them. We know this is going to be hard work, but that's why we've developed a comprehensive plan. It starts with staffing up, starts with focusing on recruiting 300 more nurses for the city of Winnipeg over the next 2 years, and of course, making the equivalent commitment to rural. But once we do so, we know that we'll be in a position to build new emergency rooms to serve your family.
Thank you. Moving on. Now we will bring in our 3 journalists, each of whom will cover a predetermined topic. Healthcare is a subject that has dominated the last few years and the campaign. Let's go to Ian Froese of CBC with a question about healthcare. Ian.
Thank you, Mary Agnes. Let's get right into it. Mrs. Stephenson, under your government, we still have some people waiting years for surgeries. Some staff have left, others are exhausted, and wait times in some hospitals are double what they were before the overhaul to the healthcare system. Why should voters trust you to fix healthcare this time?
So when it comes to healthcare, again, health human resources is the #1 issue that we're faced with out there. And this is nothing unique to Manitoba. We've faced it right across the country. We've had these discussions at the Council of Federation table, the premiers from right across the country, and what the challenges are. And we were able to band together and come together when I was chair of the Council of Federation to get more money from Ottawa to be part of the solution of this as well. But again, we have invested more than $400 million into the health human resources side of things. Recruitment, retention, training of healthcare professionals. We've reached our 2,000 goal by the end of August this year, but we're still going. We're still recruiting. 300 more nurses from the Philippines that are coming to Manitoba. This is very exciting for our province. And I can say that this is already going towards tackling the surgical backlogs that came as a result of COVID-19. In fact, we have already reached where we need to be in terms of getting back to pre-COVID when it comes to our surgeries, and we're surpassing it.
You were just asked about that decision to convert 3 ER departments into urgent care centers. Looking back, would you have done anything differently? And what would you do to remedy the situation?
Well, I think
now?
what Mr. Canoe wants to do is take us back to when we had the longest ER wait times in the country under the previous NDP government, and that wasn't after a pandemic. So I would say to Mr. Canoe that is taking us back in time. We need to move forward in healing our healthcare system.
We'll segue to Mr. Canoe there. You made that promise to reopen 3 ERs in Winnipeg. Some working in healthcare, though, say it's unrealistic because a lot of staff are needed for those ERs and for all the beds you need to support those critically ill patients. Specifically, how many staff would these hospitals need, and where would they come from?
Well, I'm so glad that you asked this question because you're articulating our plan right along with us. We know that in order to restore emergency services, it has to start with the staff. Anything we want to do in healthcare for the future of Manitoba has to start with staff. So 300 more nurses over the next 2 years, that puts us in a position to be able to break ground on a new emergency room for Victoria. And then we proceed in sequence with the others that we've announced, including Ericsdale in rural Manitoba. But we know that we're not going to get the change that we need with the same government. We can't just throw more money at the existing approach to healthcare and expect that we're going to get the results that we need. What we need is a new approach. That's what our team is bringing. And chief among the innovations that we want to bring is a new culture in healthcare. More focus on the front lines, more focus on the nurse and the aide who's serving you, and less with the bureaucracy that has flourished under the PCs. So we want to de-emphasize and simplify the bureaucracy and focus on you, the patient. This will be difficult work. I fully acknowledge that. But the way we do difficult things in Manitoba is by doing them together.
Mr. Canoe, though, where will you find these staff? Provinces throughout the country, everywhere is struggling with a staffing shortage.
Well, we've got to get into the game. Right now, other provinces are poaching our talent. So we have to have a competitive offer. We have to have better working conditions, more work-life balance, but we have to implement that better culture. So we can recruit from other provinces, we can train and develop from within, and we have retired nurses and retired aides here in the province who are willing to come back if we would offer them improved working conditions, including those working at nursing agencies. So we're going to make the right investments, we're going to make the right changes in culture so that we will be able to make healthcare work for you.
Mr. Lamont, one of your promises is to give bonuses of between $5,000 and $10,000 to all frontline healthcare workers, including those who return to the public system.
Yes.
What evidence do you have that would entice the hundreds more healthcare workers Manitoba needs?
Well, look, it was because Rhonda Nicol, who's a nurse who recently retired, told me, he said, that's the figure, and talked to a bunch of her nursing colleagues who said, that's the figure that would help people get back. It's based on a plan out of Nova Scotia. So we would be saying, this is absolutely critical. And I'll just say, the promises about ERs are so leading. One of the things that's really, really important to us is to be honest with Manitobans and not give people false hope. This is not a time for false hope, and I think that's what the NDP are doing. But we know that there are thousands of people in the healthcare system who haven't had bonuses, who are still waiting on bonuses and are backlogged and have been, they were essential workers during the pandemic and they weren't well treated and they weren't well paid. So part of this is a thank you bonus and then a retention bonus to ask, $10,000 for a nurse to come back for 2 years, because we still actually have lots of nurses in Manitoba but they've all moved into private because they can actually have a work-life balance, which they can't in the public system. So it's all about replenishing that public system, rebuilding our public system through training. We have to expand our training at the University of Manitoba, which is part of our plan. We said we should build an entirely new faculty for rural and northern family medicine in Brandon, so that we need to massively expand the number of people we're training, because for 30 years, the other two parties choked off the amount of people we can actually train in Manitoba.
You were shaking your head though at Mr. Canoe. How many ERs do you think Winnipeg needs?
Well, look, I'll make the point that this was an NDP plan in the first place, that Brian Pallister pulled it off a shelf and said, well, look at this. The NDP are planning on shutting down a whole bunch of ERs. And they had completely neglected those other hospitals in the first place. What we need is, I actually think we should consider building mini hospitals.
Can I just jump in?
No.
Because I've been invoked.
I would like
You
to
got a sec. You have a chance in a sec.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Lamont, quickly.
No, simply to say we need 3, but we need to be focusing not on building crisis centers, but on keeping people out of ERs by providing care in the community. And that's not happening.
Thank you.
I'll stop you there. Now the leaders will have a chance, as you're jonesing to do, to take the lead and question each other on this topic of healthcare. And Mr. Canoe, we'll start with you. 2.5 minutes for your question and answer segment.
All right, Manitobans probably remember when Heather Stephenson talked about a hockey game in response to a question about the death of Crystal Musso. But what you may not remember is that the reason we asked this question is because Crystal deserved better health care, better patient transportation, better care in an ICU, and a government who would have listened to the physicians raising the alarm. So I'll ask the question again. Heather Stephenson, do you agree that your cuts have led to tragic consequences for Manitobans?
First of all, I just want to recognize the Musso family and say that my heart goes out to them and continues to go out to them. And certainly there was a mistake made on my part. I owned up to it and apologized to that. That's more than I can say for other members on the panel for their wrongs of the past. But what I will say is that healthcare did not break overnight, and healthcare won't be fixed overnight. Mr. Lamont mentioned that this was something that came to the NDP and us. This actually came from a report that was commissioned under the NDP, the changes that were made, and they didn't make those changes that were necessary, so we did make those changes. But I can say to you that this all comes back to health, human resources, which is the biggest challenge. Mr. Canoe, you do not have a plan. You are not articulating a plan to do that. We have already taken significant action, and we will continue to take more action in that direction.
Mr. Canoe?
This young woman had a name, Crystal Musso. I want everyone in our province to remember that name, because Crystal deserved better health care. And what you just heard there was an admission that she deserved better health care, but what you did not hear was a commitment to provide better health care from the PCs. And I want everyone to remember Crystal's name, because I think so many of us in this province know somebody where we're still asking those what-if questions. What if healthcare had been better? And that's the reason why I'm running, because I don't want situations like this to happen in our province again. I want you and the people that you care about to have the health care that you need.
Mr. Lamont, your question to a leader.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Canoe. Look, when it comes to our platform, overwhelmingly what we're doing is investing in people, because that's what we need to do. I keep hearing announcements from the other parties saying they're investing in buildings and buildings and buildings. But again, experts on the left and the right have warned that the NDP and PC plans cannot be run without either having huge deficits or more cuts. So how can we possibly trust you to do this when it's so unclear how you're going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for these promises?
You know, I think the people of Manitoba expect us to be balanced when it comes to the books. And that's why one of my first commitments on this campaign was to balance the books within a first mandate, should we get the great honor of serving you, the people of Manitoba. Now, when it comes to staffing up the healthcare system, our commitment is $125 million a year towards staffing. And when we're talking about our single biggest commitment, it is that new emergency room at the Victoria Hospital. And when you talk about building a facility like that, it's just like your mortgage. It's paid off over a series of years, in this case, 40 years. We have the money in the budget right now to make these investments in people in the healthcare system. We have this money in the budget right now to build new healthcare facilities, which are going to provide better care for you, the people of Manitoba. And so unlike the PCs, who just keep $500 million in a contingency fund that they want to distribute at the end of the fiscal year, we're saying it's better fiscal management, it's more transparent government if we just tell you right now that we're going to invest this money in health human resources and lowering costs for your family.
Mr. Lamont, your reply?
Look, I mean, I've talked to lots of people, Liberals and people in business who are really concerned because what you're promising is cuts. It's going to be very, very difficult to aim to balance that budget when you're promising massive tax cuts and borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars a year to send to billionaires. And again, the CCPA and others have said there is no way this is going to work without cuts. And the other thing about it is that the government itself, the Manitoba government, has warned we are too dependent on federal transfers, and there could be a serious change in government. We need to be more independent, and we need to be investing in people and not just buildings. The promises about ERs are wonderful. They're great, but it's not going to work if they're empty. And that's the real risk with the NDP. They are not being straightforward.
And that's why our plan for healthcare starts with staffing. The first 2 years is focused on more nurses, more doctors, so that we can get into a position to open these ERs.
I think we're finished on the healthcare topic. I got to move on here to the next topic, which is the cost of living, which is an issue that is hitting home for a lot of questions. Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Do you?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Go ahead.
Good for you. Stand up for yourself.
Politely, I'll stand up
Thank
for
you,
myself.
Mrs. Stephenson. Go ahead.
In leadership, trust is paramount. Mr. Canoe, you claim that ER Dr. Doug Elifson had endorsed your ER plan. Dr. Elifson has since clarified that this is patently false. It's not the first time Mr. Canoe has misled Manitobans and has a history of making false claims. My question is for Mr. Lamont. What does it say when a leader and a want-to-be premier has to fabricate this kind of support?
Look, I was shocked. I was surprised when Mr. Canoe said that that Dr. Doug Elifson, who's a friend and a Liberal and a very prominent emergency room physician, had endorsed it. Because one of the reasons that Doug Elifson ran for politics as an ER doctor in 2015 was because there were seniors living in the Grace Hospital ER for months at a time. That's the kind of crises we've had in ERs under the NDP. There was also the case of Brian Sinclair. So one of the things that the NDP tends to do is pretend the world began in 2016 when the PCs were elected. We all know that the NDP were a disaster, and sometimes a dangerous disaster, including having tragedies in ERs. And unfortunately, I'll say to the Premier that those lessons were not learned. It wasn't just a question of closing other ERs, it's the fact that the construction of the St. Boniface ER, where I happened to spend 25 hours once a couple of years ago with a serious back injury, was under construction. So we don't even have 3 full ERs, we have 2.5 ERs, which are massively overwhelmed. So it's extremely frustrating because to be outright lying in the middle of a leaders' debate is beyond disturbing.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. Mrs. Stephenson?
So we are
40 seconds.
talking about the central core pillar of Mr. Canoe's election campaign, and it is being debunked by doctors. So I would say to Manitobans, don't be fooled by Mr. Canoe. It won't be fixed overnight. PCs have invested historic amounts in our healthcare system and have put the system on a road to recovery. And those are the facts. And I know my opponents, I know Mr. Canoe likes to talk about the investments that we're making in healthcare. We're making record investments in our healthcare system, a 23% increase since we came into office, 9% last year alone. That's more investments in healthcare.
Thank you, Mrs.
I'd like to respond.
Mr. Canoe,
I'll make it quick.
Okay, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Quick.
What Dr. Elifson said is that closing emergency rooms was a huge mistake. And I agree with him.
And so do I.
That's why we're committed to opening new emergency rooms. But at the hospital where Dr. Elifson works this weekend, the wait time was 17 hours. You could drive to the Rocky Mountains and see a doctor there more quickly than one in your own community.
All right.
We got to fix it.
We got to move on. I'm sorry, Mr.
No,
Lamont.
this is
We got to
also a
move on
breach
to
of
the
rules.
next topic
I
here.
want that to be acknowledged.
The cost of living is an issue that I think we need to talk about here. It's hitting home for a lot of voters. The CTV's Jeff Keel has some questions for the leaders on affordability and the economy and whatever else they might like to talk about. Keel.
Thank you, Mary Agnes. Mr. Lamont,
Yep.
you say you will renegotiate the carbon tax with Ottawa and use the money for a green fund. So what would happen with the rebates Manitobans are currently getting, and how much would Manitobans pay under your plan for a carbon tax?
It would be exactly the same as it is, but we would actually, one of the things about taking back control of the carbon tax is that, or the carbon levy, is that we would actually be able to provide forgiveness for farmers, for grain drying. The other thing about it is that $300 million green fund that we're using would go to investing in permanent cost reductions. So it would help people pay for energy retrofits, for rewilding. This is, I mean, lots of the time people complain about the issue with the carbon tax is that it's just coming back. This is actually about using it as a green fund to permanently lower people's costs, because people would get grants for insulation, they would get grants to help green, and that would work as much for business, for First Nations, for municipalities, $300 million a year. There would still be some, but we're also offering a personal income tax cut for people who need it, which is very progressive and evidence-based. So we do have a very serious focus on affordability, and part of it is about making sure that we're bringing those costs down for good.
But I'd like a clarification on the rebate, though. It won't be the same because you're going to be using that money in your green fund. What will it look like?
No, look, the rebate would not be the same, but it's because people would also be able to, but instead of getting a rebate, people would be able to apply to a green program that would actually be able to fund something like geothermal. It'd actually be, you'd have the possibility of much more generous rebates and lowering, and like I say, lowering energy costs for the long run.
Heather Stephenson, my next question is for you. You're promising big tax cuts, including phasing out the payroll tax, taking PST off restaurant bills, and cutting income taxes, which, when fully implemented, will cost the government more than $600 million a year, and you say you'll balance the books by 2025. So how can you do all that and still pay for big ticket items like education, healthcare, and infrastructure?
Yeah. We're going to do it by growing the economy, and we're the only ones in this race that has a plan and a vision to grow our economy. Our Vision 2030 to make Manitoba a have province again and to see us grow to 2 million people strong. But what I will say on the topic of affordability is that we are the only ones that have already started to put more money back in the pockets of Manitobans through our last budget and previous budgets where we gave income tax and other relief to Manitobans. The Carbon Tax Relief Fund, $200 million that went back to Manitobans who were struggling at the time. And the leader and Mr. Canoe voted against that. We have been lowering taxes also in that budget, but also we recognize there's more work to be done. We recognize that Manitobans are having troubles making ends meet. Now, Mr. Canoe has a plan, a short-term 6-month plan for a 4-year term. That is not long-term tax relief for Manitobans. That's what we're offering.
What happens, though, if the economy doesn't grow at the same pace as these tax cuts? Well, you have to make cuts in order to fund the tax cuts.
No, we're going to grow our economy. Right now, there are so many exciting things happening right now on our economic development front. 64 different projects, companies interested in coming to Manitoba. 13 of those are ready to go. $26 billion investment in Manitoba that will add to our GDP, an increase of 11% or $8.5 billion. What that means to Manitobans, that means that life will be more affordable. That means that we'll have more money for healthcare, for education, and for social services.
Mr. Canoe, I would like to touch on something that Ms. Stephenson touched on. You've committed to a temporary gas tax cut and a temporary freeze of hydro rates, but what is your long-term permanent plan to help people with grocery bills, the price at the pumps, and their mortgages, because we know interest rates are going up and we know inflation is still very stubborn?
Well, our plan is simple. No games, no finger pointing. We're just going to help you. We're going to help you and your family right now during your time of need. So when it comes to freezing hydroelectric rates, that permanently reduces hydro rates going forward into the future. So it's a permanent measure. When we're talking about the cut to the gas tax, it's a simple reality. The government can't do everything, but we can do something. which should be to help you at one of the greatest pain points in our economy right now, which is when you go to the gas station. And so while some others have been pointing the finger at other levels of government for the carbon tax, they've been charging you 14 cents a liter the whole time. That's what I mean, no more games.
So then why not
Let's
cut
just help
the
people right now.
gas tax permanently then?
Because we have to also balance our responsibility to the environment. If you cut the gas tax for 1 year, emissions will not rise. Emissions will not rise over 1 year because over 1 year time, people have already made their decision of what kind of car they're going to drive, how far they're going to live from work. So part of why this is a temporary measure is so that we can balance the need to help you right now while also preparing the next generation to have a safe, clean, and healthy environment. But at the end of the day, we know that people need help right now in this moment. And that's why we've prioritized cutting the gas tax, because it will help you directly when you go to the pump. But the big grocery chains have said transportation costs are one of their big reasons for passing on costs to you. So we're going to take that out of the window.
Jeff Keel,
Very quickly,
a quick question. Keel.
Very quickly, I have a quick question for all three of you. We've got less than 30 seconds, starting in the same order. Mr. Lamont, the PST, leave it, raise it, or lower it?
Oh, leave it. Look, but I just want...
No.
Heather
Carrying on.
Stephenson.
We got to leave it for now. We'd love to lower it, but stay tuned for later on, sometime down the road when we're back in government.
Bob Canoe.
Leave it, raise it, or lower it?
I will never raise the PST.
Thank you. Let's move
Thank
on
you,
to
Jeff.
the one-on-one questions on affordability. Again, I feel like there's some questions you folks want to ask each other. Mrs. Stephenson, you get to start this time. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Mr. Canoe, your party's relationship with the truth is strained. Manitobans remember the NDP promising not to raise the PST, but you did just that. Now you're promising $3 billion in new spending. We know that the NDP's only planned to raise the PST. Mr. Lamont, do you believe the NDP PST hike would, to quote your colleague, break the backs of those that can least afford it?
Look, I don't like the PST as a tax. It's, I mean, ironically, it was originally brought in by a PC government back in the 1960s, but the biggest challenge around it is that it's regressive. But I will also say that in choosing to cut it, the PC's borrowed money to cut it. So we added $300 million to the debt, and that exactly the same thing is happening when it comes to borrowing for property tax rebates. We have added to our debt by over $1 billion to send checks to places like Cadillac Fairview, to the Koch brothers, to CN, to pipelines, people who should be paying education taxes and helping us balance the budget. There's no economic benefit from it at all. But that's why we've decided to bring in progressive income tax cuts that'll actually help people at the bottom who are really, really suffering, and to make sure that we're raising a little bit for people making $300,000 and over.
Mrs. Stephenson, quick reply.
So Mr. Canoe said earlier that he said he would not raise the PST. Well, we heard that before from Greg Selinger, another previous NDP Premier of Manitoba, who promised going door to door to Manitobans. He promised not to raise the PST, and then as soon as he got into government, the first thing he did was he raised the PST to 8%. We feel that that was wrong. So when we came into power, we made a promise to lower the PST, and that's what we did. So don't be fooled by Mr. Canoe, who says that he won't raise the PST. We have seen it before from other NDP governments and other NDP premiers, and I can tell you that we cannot trust this moving forward. How is he going to pay for the $3 billion? It's going to be by raising the PST. There's no question in my mind.
Thank you, Mrs. Stephenson. Wab Canoe, a question from you.
A question?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I am working with a former NDP premier this time, and it's Gary Dewar. Gary Dewar, who balanced the budget 10 times in a row in this province. And Gary Dewar had a simple rule. Mr. Dewar said for politicians, don't raise the price of beer. And that's the school of politics that I come from.
And
that's why I want to cut the gas tax and freeze hydro rates. Heather Stephenson has ruled this out. So my question for Heather Stephenson is, why are you denying this help to Manitobans at a time when they need it most?
Am I missing something? Is Gary Dewar running for politics again in Manitoba? Now, I have a lot of respect for Gary Dewar. There's no question, but he is not going to be the Premier of Manitoba after this election. So you're going to have to make some tough decisions if you get there. But I'll tell you, we're going to make sure that you don't get there. We have the only plan to make life more affordable for Manitobans. In fact, in the last budget, we offered $5,500 in tax breaks and savings for Manitobans. And Mr. Canoe voted against that. We are the only party with a long-term vision to make life more affordable for Manitobans. Think of helping young families buying their first home out there. We've offered to eliminate the land transfer tax for first-time home buyers, giving $5,700 back into those young families who are trying to start off their lives. We've offered property tax deferrals for seniors aging in place. We have taken the PST off of restaurant meals. We have offered more income tax relief in this election now as well. More than $1,900. That's another paycheck for many Manitobans, or it certainly means a larger paycheck for Manitobans. And I can tell you that is what makes life more affordable for Manitobans in the long term and our problem, not the short-term quick fix that Mr. Canoe is talking about.
Thank you. Quick reply, Mr. Canoe.
Well, there's thousands of Manitobans on a picket line right now because you won't help them get a bigger paycheck. And when it comes to tough decisions, I'm making the tough decision to go ahead with an ambitious plan. I'm not content to say that fixing healthcare is going to be hard and so we should just walk away from it. Our team is saying, let's commit to rebuilding healthcare and let's help you with affordability along the way. So yeah, we're going to take direct steps right now to lower costs for you and your family.
Thank you, Mr. Canoe. Mr. Lamont, your question to another leader.
Yeah, a question for Mr. Canoe. Today, the Manitoba Teachers Society released a poll saying 60% of Manitobans support getting rid of the checks for billionaires as he did prior a few months ago. Manitoba Liberals are the only party to commit to repealing that scheme. But on May 8th, Mr. Canoe, you asked the Premier whether she would abandon Brian Pallister's policy of giving handouts to billionaires who do not live in Manitoba. But 3 months later, you announced they would keep those handouts except move to direct deposit, blowing a $500 million hole in the education budget. How can you possibly justify this about-face?
So we are committed to ending the practice of sending checks to out-of-province billionaires. The value right now is $5 million. So when we move away from this program implemented by the PCs, that'll be $5 million that we can devote towards a province-wide, universally accessible nutrition program for kids in schools. You know, there's a great leader in our province who once said that the best economic plan is a good education plan. And I believe in that. And right now there are too many kids in our province going hungry. And when you listen to the teachers, you talk to the Manitoba Teachers Society, they'll tell you if you want to improve reading and math, that you need to help young people deal with the barriers that they're facing even before they get to the classroom. Issues like hunger, issues like poverty. And even if your child is going to school with the lunchbox in hand, just reflect on the fact they may be sitting in class with a child who is hungry. And so this is a rising tide will lift all boats type of initiative. The overall value of ensuring that we see no more kids falling through the cracks when it comes to hunger in schools will be $30 million. We've costed this out, and this $5 million that we're talking about right here will go some way towards remedying that situation.
I'll stop you there. Yep. Mr. Lamont, rebuttal.
Well, look, he completely avoided the question. They're still sending hundreds of millions of dollars and borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars to send million-dollar checks to Cadillac Fairview. And he called it the Pallister Plan. So, you know, how do you do your Pallister canoe? Right? And I have to say, when it comes to talking about children in poverty, I'm not as big a fan of Gary Dewar as everyone else is, because we still have the same social assistance rates we did in 1986. Because all that time that Gary Dewar was in power, balancing the budget, he was balancing it on the backs of the poorest people in Manitoba.
Let's leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Lamont. I don't think I missed anybody this time. We'll move on to our third final big topic, Global's Marnie Blunt will question the leaders about crime and safety. Marnie.
Thanks, Mary Agnes. My first question is for Mr. Canoe. Mr. Canoe, you've laid out your public safety plan, which promises to be tough on crime and the root causes of crime. Many of these promises will take significant time to build on and establish. Meanwhile, crime's rampant right now. We've seen a record number of homicides in Winnipeg last year. Numerous families are hurting, and at the core of much of it is a mental health and addictions crisis. If elected, what immediate action will you take to crack down on crime within the first 100 days?
Bail. We'll start with bail right away. There's no need to wait for other levels of government to take action here. We can implement bail reform at the provincial level. And so within the first 100 days, to your question, we will direct the Ministry of Justice to implement stronger conditions on bail to keep you safe in the community. And so yes, we are committed to being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. But I think we all see that what's happening right now, because you mentioned addictions right now, that things are worse than they've ever been. They certainly feel that way, and many of the statistics back that up. So we know that we need to tackle this issue. And when we move to the causes of crime, here's where I want to make a direct commitment to you, the people of Manitoba. I am committing, should we get the great honor of serving, that we would, over 2 terms, end chronic homelessness in Manitoba. We have to bring the business leaders together with the not-for-profits, with the various levels of government. But anytime we see a bus shack or a bridge or an encampment, we know we can do better. It's time to end chronic homelessness in Manitoba.
And that brings me to my next question, which is for Mr. Lamont. Mr. Lamont, your party has campaigned on the Liberals being the alternative between the PCs and the NDP. Yet one of your promises to address crime is to have addictions and mental health workers working in tandem with law enforcement. The PCs already have a similar program running. The NDP have promised something similar. How will your promise differ and improve upon what's already in place?
Well, I actually want to address something that Mr. Canoe said about homelessness. His party is promising to end homelessness 8 years from now. There are hundreds of people who live on the streets of Winnipeg. Over half of them used to be in the Child and Family Services as a result of the policies of these 2 governments. They were stranded on the street by these 2 governments who took them from their families and abandoned them. We have promised to have same-day housing. It'll take 2 years to set up, but the idea is that you don't wait 6 months, which you have to right now, to be chronically homeless. We have to address homelessness as an act of reconciliation, because 70% of these people are Indigenous. And for the NDP to say they're going to take 8 years to address homelessness, when we could be doing it now because they don't have the money and because they want to balance the budget faster, means we're sacrificing people on the street instead of rescuing them. That's what we should be doing.
And a lot of what you're talking about has to do with prevention and preventing crime happening. But I've heard from a lot of advocates who say the people that feel like the forgotten part of this equation are the victims.
Yep.
What will you do to support the countless Manitobans that have already been victimized or are currently being victimized by crime?
You know, I met someone who had a family member who was murdered when I was door knocking last night. And I talked to a bunch of seniors who are running out of food. This is a really, really hard time in Manitoba. It's really, really hard. But I'm very proud that we've always been standing with victims of crime. In fact, sometimes we're the only party to stand with victims of crime. Because whether it was making sure that we committed to the search of the landfill, whether it was standing up for survivors of Peter Nygard, that's something we've been committed to, but making sure that they are put at the center of what we need to do. We need more victim services as well.
I'm going to have to move on to my final question, which is for Ms. Stephenson. Ms. Stephenson, you mentioned the search of the Prairie Green landfill and that your government will not support the search, but other organizations, including the Assembly Manitoba Chiefs, have said that the search can be done safely. Now, of course, this has raised concerns over issues on trust and just how seriously your government takes the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. Considering this issue has so much heartbreak behind it, for Manitobans at home now, why won't you take another look at having a further discussion on searching this landfill?
Well, first of all, my heart goes out to those families and those communities who have lost their loved ones. And that's why, we are investing in programs to help prevent this from happening in the first place. We were out just last week with Quest, a treatment partnership with First Nations, helping First Nations. and working in partnership. That's true reconciliation, working together, 180 more beds to help ensure that we prevent those people from prevent MMIWG from getting into the situation in the first place. We need to focus on prevention.
Given that
but
there's...
I will tell you again, sometimes people have to make tough decisions. Leaders have to make tough decisions. This is one of those tough decisions I had to make. But in the report it says very clearly that there are very significant risks associated with searching the landfill. I cannot, in good conscience, put workers' health at risk doing that when there is no guarantee of finding the individuals that they're talking about, the bodies.
Thank you, Mrs. Stephenson. You'll have a chance right now. In fact, you're the first one. We're going to move on to those one-on-one questions about crime and safety, starting with Liberal leader Dougald Lamont. Go ahead.
Look, I know this is a question for Mr. Canoe. I know the PCs have kept talking tough on crime, but frankly, they are the ones who've been in charge for 7 years. And we know crime rates across the province are at crisis levels because for those 7 years, the PC government froze and cut funding to municipalities and police budgets. Now, Manitoba Liberals in our platform committed to cracking down on human traffickers and illicit drugs, drug operating in Manitoba as legal businesses. There are millions of dollars being made illegally. And Winnipeg is a hub for human trafficking. We have serious gang problems, serious illicit drug problems, and we agree with anti-corruption organizations we need a public registry so police and prosecutors can go after them. These are the real drivers of violent crime in the province. Why don't you and the NDP want to deal with this?
So when I say tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, what I mean is that when somebody does something wrong, we have to take them off the streets and hold them accountable. And when we talk about the causes of crime, I think we all know that it's drugs. For so many of the issues that we're seeing each and every day, it's drugs, it's addictions. And what have you gotten from Heather Stephenson as crime rates have gone up, as things feel worse than they were before they took office? Well, they've been hard on the people with addictions, but they've been soft on the drug traffickers. Something's wrong in that equation. So we will bring the hammer down on drug traffickers. We will crack down on the people who are bringing toxic drugs into our communities, the people who are breaking our families apart, who are robbing us of our loved ones. One step is to bring in an Unexplained Wealth Act. That'll mean if there's a gangster driving a $100,000 car, we're going to ask, how did you get that? And if you can't explain it, we will hold you accountable.
Mr. Lamont, last word.
Look, that's not an answer. I mean, we have a terrible problem with human trafficking in Manitoba. It's hugely linked to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I have to say, there has never been an MMIWG inquiry in Manitoba because the NDP, when asked for one, said they wouldn't do it. Just on the landfill, this should never have been a political issue at all. This should just be a straight-out police investigation. There have been searches with hundreds of police officers for a single person in Toronto, and they just paid for it without thinking.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Stephenson, your question.
Manitoba PCs have been focused on making streets safer. We've introduced plans to fight violent crime and the root causes of crime. We're also fighting Ottawa for bail reform to stop the revolving door of violent criminals, sex offenders, and drug dealers. We stand against that. Mr. Canoe, we outlined a comprehensive strategy in our last budget, which you voted against. Why are you so intent to keep violent criminals on the streets instead of behind bars where they belong?
I voted against your health care cuts, and I'll do it every single time the PCs try to cut health care in our province. Again, reflect on the exchange that you've heard here so far. We're saying we can bring in better bail conditions to keep you safe right here in Manitoba. To my left, apparently it's only a federal issue. We're saying it's time to crack down on drug traffickers. And yet, again, to my left, you see only more excuses being made. The time for excuses is over. We cannot say that these issues are simply national problems and that we want to wait for national solutions. We have to start solving these issues here in Manitoba. We have great organizations, people like the Bear Clan, Downtown Community Safety Patrol, Mama Bear Clan. Again, Sabe Peace Walkers. Let's use these folks to reach out into the community. At the same time, let's work with law enforcement to ensure that they have the right resources to be able to keep you safe. And all the while, we need to make steady progress on the goal that I outlined at the start of this section. which is to end chronic homelessness in Manitoba.
Mrs. Stephenson.
Mr. Canoe, you talk a good talk, but you don't walk the walk. We have introduced a strategy, a violent crime strategy, that you have voted against time and time again. Strengthening intensive bail and supervision for serious violent offenders. You voted against it. Increasing Manitoba Prosecution Service capacity to put violent criminals behind bars. You voted against it. Supporting child abuse response. You voted against it. Integrated violent offender unit. You voted against it. Supporting integrated missing persons response unit. You voted against that too. How can you honestly stand before Manitobans and say that you are tough on crime when you voted against every single thing that we have done to get these criminals, violent criminals?
Thank you, Heather
off the streets?
Stephenson. Mr. Canoe, this is your time.
I voted against your health care cuts.
Getting a lot of extra time.
Again,
No, this is his question
these
time.
were all omnibus bills packaged with health care cuts. I will stand up for health care every single day. So we have to be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. But Heather Stephenson has been tough on people with addictions. She's been soft on the drug traffickers. I'm saying that has to change. So my question for Heather Stephenson is, why have you been hard on the people living in bus shelters, but soft on the people supplying them drugs?
Well, Mr. Canoe, I just outlined a number of things, but I'm going to go through it again because it's very important that you hear and that Manitobans hear some of the things that you have voted against since we have been in the Manitoba legislature and we have put forward our violent crime strategy. We need to make sure we keep violent criminals, sex offenders, drug dealers off of our streets. That's why we have a violent crime strategy that strengthens intensive bail and supervision for serious violent offenders. Again, you voted against that. Increasing Manitoba Prosecution Service capacity to put violent criminals behind bars. Again, you had an opportunity to stand up and vote in favor of that, but you didn't. You voted against that. We've supported integrated missing persons response unit. Again, you voted against that. Supporting a child abuse response. You voted against that. An integrated violent offender unit with a criminal intelligence capacity targets and monitors high-risk individuals with arrest warrants, involvement in gangs and trafficking, and you voted against that. Again, you talk a good talk,
Mr.
but
Canoe.
you don't walk the walk.
You know, many of the programs that you just listed there are programs that you cut when you were the Attorney General. And now you want credit in an election year for restoring cuts that happened under your watch. We can surely do better than this, especially when it comes to safety in our communities. And that's why we're saying we need to have a comprehensive approach that works towards ending chronic homelessness in our province, but also works with law enforcement and community to keep you safe.
Thank you, Mr. Canoe. We have to move on. We are almost done. This is our final segment of the evening. Each leader has 1 minute for a closing statement, and we'll start with Heather Stephenson.
Thank you very much. We have talked about many important issues this evening, but what I want to emphasize now is just how much I believe in Manitoba. I believe we can be the fastest growing, most competitive province in the country on our way to 2 million people strong. What we are doing is working. We are making progress with record population growth, more Manitobans working than ever before, strong economic growth. And when the economy is growing, every Manitoban benefits. We are the only party with a vision and a plan to grow our economy so we can heal our healthcare, make life more affordable, and make our streets safer. Our stable, experienced PC team has made so much progress. Imagine what we could do with 4 more years. Let's keep the momentum going together. Vote for Manitoba Progressive Conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stephenson. Mr. Canoe, final statements.
I want to take this moment to thank you. Thank you for giving our team a fair hearing. This year, your vote is so important because your vote can change the government in Manitoba. And we need to change the government if we want to fix healthcare in our province. And let's be very clear, as we speak here this evening, this election is very close. Not a single ballot has been cast. And that's why I'm encouraging everyone to get out there and vote this October 3rd or in the advanced period. But I want to close by reaching out to people who voted Liberal in the past. This year, I think we need to work together. I'm humbly asking for you to vote for a government that can fix healthcare. So for all Manitobans, let's work together as we move towards October 3rd. Let's vote to change the government. Let's vote to fix healthcare. And it's with the greatest of humility that I'm asking for you to vote for the Manitoba NDP.
Thank you. Mr. Lamont, final
Thank
words.
you. Look, we can't afford to vote for two parties who are clearly just making it up as they go along. I don't know what the PCs and the NDP are supposed to stand for anymore, because they're both promising the same things. What choice does that give you when an election is supposed to be about choice? On all the things that matter, the NDP and the PCs are promising the same thing. They're promising to keep the same budget. They're both promising the same cuts, the same checks for billionaires. They're even agreeing on the same reckless COVID policies. I got a text from a nurse who said she burst into tears when she heard that these two agreed about the fact that they'll do nothing if COVID starts ripping through Manitoba again. And so many of the NDP's promises will take years, even if they happen at all. They're abandoning teachers, they're abandoning students, nurses, people living in poverty, people in the north, Indigenous people. That's not a real choice. That's not real change. The polls are close. There could be a minority government. You do not have to hold your nose to vote NDP to get rid of Heather Stephenson. You can vote for Manitoba Liberals and stop both.
Thank you, Mr. Lamont. That is all the time we have for the Manitoba Leaders Debate 2023. Thank you so much to all the leaders. And a reminder to get out and vote on October 3rd or at any advanced polling location starting Saturday. Thank you so much. Good night.
Hello there. Thank you for joining us for our special online coverage of the debate. We are going to analyze it, talk about who won and those moments that may have really changed the way voters feel. Joining me this evening to discuss it is Bartley Kives from CBC News. Thanks for being here.
Hello, I'm here.
You are here.
I'm standing up more straight now.
Oh, that's very good. I have to do the same thing. Ian Froese will join us soon and sit over there. But right now he's downstairs where the debate was held, and he's going to be scurrying upstairs to join us.
Upstairs on his very long legs.
So Bartley and I have been sitting here, like you, watching the debate. What's your first impression? First thing that you want to say?
Well, obvious, and I think this would have been apparent to anybody watching this debate, is that both Heather Stephenson and Dougald Lamont decided to go after Wab Kinew. It's clear that Kinew and the NDP are now the perceived frontrunners or the actual frontrunners in this one, given that we saw the Angus Reid Institute poll and the Probe Research poll over the last couple of days, both place the NDP with leads. So a lot of questions given to Wab Kinew about his plans or lack thereof, and less attention placed on Stephenson and on Dougald Lamont. Obviously, Wab Kinew asked some questions of Heather Stephenson, and one key moment. This was, to me, the most fascinating tactical moment. Perhaps not the greatest moment of import for this debate, for this election, but when Heather Stephenson had the chance to ask a question of Kinew, she decided to ask it of Lamont when she was asking about the Ailfson endorsement, the phony endorsement, and she asked it of Lamont. So Lamont answered. Kinew did not have the opportunity to respond. That was really a very good tactical move.
It was a tactical move, absolutely. And what she's talking about, of course, Doug Ailfson saying that well, the NDP coming out and saying that this emergency room doctor endorsed his plan,
yes,
which he did not.
And he was a former Liberal MP, and Wab Kinew had said that had described it as an endorsement, when in reality the tweet simply said that he agreed that, or he stated that the closure of ERs was the wrong idea. When Kinew finally had a chance to address this in this debate, and before earlier in this election when he's had a chance to address that, Kinew has, he sidestepped that question by simply stating that Ailfson agreed.
Well, what do you think about, we'll be talking more about the performance of everyone. By the way, Ian Froese is sneaking in the room right now, so we'll get him in soon.
Sneaking in very
Sneaking in the room, yes. But he, what do you think about how Wab Kinew didn't actually answer a lot of the questions he was asked.
He didn't answer, but quite frankly, not a lot of questions were said at Lamont as well. Neither Canoe nor Stephenson answer questions. In the modern debating tactic is you nominally answer, and then you just speak about the things that are in your platform, and you talk about your talking points. And they're all quite masterful at that. I mean, politicians at every level of government. We see it at the civic level, we see it at the provincial level, we see it at the federal level. They're going to talk about what they want to talk about. Nowhere in this hour was anyone ever to really get anybody off their game or get inside their head or get them off their talking points?
Getting a politician off talking points is not an easy thing to do, right?
It's not an easy thing to do.
There were a couple of jabs, a couple of moments that you and I both went, whoa, that's, woo, ah. There were
a couple of jabs there, but it was, and a couple of times where Dougald Lamont sighed audibly when he was not on camera. So I'm like, wait, where's that audio effect coming from? Hello, Ian Froese, how are you? You are not an audio effect, you're a real human being.
A real human being that will join on our three-shot now so we can expose the world to the beautiful purple tie of Ian.
I am looking to the right. I'm looking to the right at you.
I have a question.
Yes.
You were in the room. What was it like? What was the tension level?
I mean, everyone was there kind of 10 minutes early, pretty quiet. You know, everyone was sort of going over their notes, sort of assessing things. Once we got into it, and you were just alluding to it, Bart, you could hear Dougald Lamont a few times with some audible sighs. You know, some disagreements over someone getting too much time. I think you've heard that a few times. So there was a lot of, there was tension in the room undoubtedly as the debate was getting going.
And who else was in the room with these leaders? Who are the people we didn't see?
Yeah,
you don't have to name them all, but how many folks were there?
Camera people.
There was like 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Yeah.
Like handlers for the leaders.
Oh no, those folks were out of the room.
No
they
hand
were.
signals.
No handlers, no people there prompting or whatever.
No.
Okay, so your overall impression?
I mean, I was struck by how much Wab Kinew was attacked sort of throughout the entire debate.
This is the first thing we mentioned right before you came in here.
But what is that a surprise? Because he is the leader in the polls, according to
I guess ultimately not a surprise for that. And understandably, you guys touched on that same point there. The polls show he is the leader, so they're going to go after him. And again, something else you might have mentioned as well was, you know, Heather Stephenson giving her questions, or 2 questions to Dougald Lamont, softballs effectively.
But about the NDP, so that Kinew had no opportunity to respond or combat them. To me, I mean, I wrote down some notes here about things that struck me out of here. Early on, Lamont, I feel like his best jab was how can we trust, I'll stop swinging back and forth for a second. How can we trust you, talking to Kinew, when you change your plans? Of course, Kinew didn't answer that question. That was effective. And then the early Kinew strategy of mentioning what Stephenson said in response to his question in the legislature about Crystal Mousseau.
That was an effective moment. That was a dramatic moment where he managed, I'm sorry, Bartley, where he managed to bring up a moment that I think we've heard from different polls have touched on this. It was a moment that struck voters as one that then Premier Stephenson did not handle well.
And she was a new premier, and she clearly was told, or appears to be told, I do not know what is in her head, and I can't purport to, talk about yourself, talk about your family more, and she was on that message track when she spoke about her son in the hockey game. And then he asked her about that tragedy, and Stephenson apologized for Mousseau, and then came back with, well, you know, I apologize, which is more than I can say for their wrongs for the past, referring to Lamont and Kinew.
We're really bringing up again, because I think that's been a strategy for the Progressive Conservatives through this campaign and before it, is to plant seeds of doubt in the voters' mind about specifically Wab Kinew and his brushes with the law in the past. And of course, Crystal Mousseau is a young woman who died. She had COVID-19, and because our hospitals were overloaded, she was being transferred out of province when something went terribly wrong during that air transfer, and she died.
But what were the wrongs for the past of Mr. Lamont she might have been referring to? I'm scratching my head. Did she just throw Lamont in there to make it less?
No, what I wrote down that she actually said was, which is more than I can say, I apologized. I made a mistake. I made amends for what I did, which is more than I can say for others on this panel.
It's a very sly moment for Heather Stephenson to say that, because you don't want to look mean on TV, right? And if you alluding to that sort of the troubled past that Kinew has. You don't want to look mean on TV, so you don't want to spell it out. But when you just show that little comment there, Ron's of the past, people are going to pick up on that. Some, not all.
It's just an effort to remind people that things have not always been.
Yeah, I was just scrolling desperately through my through a transcript that's been sent to me, but I didn't find it immediately. I also found it interesting when, just as you're talking about funny jabs, when Dougald Lamont said, "How do you do your Pallister canoe?" You know, we keep hearing this. How do you do your Wob canoe? Maybe some people who don't watch all the press conferences. I was looking at some online chatter during this debate, and some people go, "Oh, that's a good line." It's like, he used that one in 2019 all the time. How have we not? I don't know. We see this all the time.
Well, I've gone to enough NDP announcements now where there's a chuckle. Someone chuckles. So it is new to some people each time he
Well, just
does
the
it.
line, how do you do? I'm Wob Canoe. How often does Wob Canoe say that, Ian?
Oh,
Every time.
Every announcement during the election campaign. And for the NDP, their election campaign started in August, you know, sort of. They've been out pretty well every day.
How effective do you think Dougald Lamont's attacks on property taxes, on the NDP saying that we will continue those property tax rebates, that school levy rebates, rather, I should say, that the large property owners, rich people, millionaires, billionaires they talk to will continue to be handed out, although that will be by direct deposit instead of check? That's the only change the NDPs have said they'd go.
He is alluding to something that was really a big NDP attack line for really 2 months. Like in the legislature, this came up all the time, the billionaires. He never, I think today was the first time he put a price tag on it. Like Wob Canoe said, it's going to cost around $5 million, which frankly isn't a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but yet he continued to hammer home on that point.
But that's only if they stop giving them to people who no longer live here, to out of province.
Yeah, the out of province billionaires. It's a small portion of it.
$5 million.
Yeah. Was it effective?
For Dougald Lamont to keep bringing that
for
up.
Dougald Lamont, it adds to his argument that Wob Canoe and the NDP is flip-flopping. So I think that's the benefit.
Hence the name Pallister Canoe.
I don't know how well it will stick. To me, the biggest hit on Canoe in this particular debate was when Stephenson asked about his long-term economic plan, and he couldn't actually articulate one. He simply repeated what they had already planned. He stated that the hydro rate freeze would stick around, but he didn't really articulate, a long-term plan there. And that, to me, it's a fleeting moment, but that to me stuck out as...
I thought Stephenson was fairly strong in some of those points of the hydro rate, the gas tax, it's temporary. And Stephenson says it's, her stuff is permanent. We've heard that throughout the campaign. But just, there was a moment when, I think it was a follow-up from Jeff Keel from CTV, asking Canoe, so what happens afterwards? Or why can't you make the gas tax permanent? And Canoe said because of the environment, and there were chuckles, not sure if you guys were able to hear that, from both Stephenson and Lamont, again, trying to poke holes in the NDP's affordability
And yet,
plan.
when Stephenson has been asked long-term about how her plans would be to make up for revenue shortfalls that will result from all of the tax cuts, and she responded with this, something we've heard if you follow the debates, this grow the economy line. I mean, we saw this in the civic election last year. Jenny Muckaluk had said this a bunch. Well, we're just going to grow the economy. Even the current mayor, Scott Gillingham, has talked about growing the economy to some degree to help cover things. Growing the economy in long term isn't a plan, it's kind of a hope. And that has been, it is fair for Lamont to cite that both the NDP's spending plan and the PC's tax cut plan, it's fair for him to say that these are uncosted. At the same time, I don't know how effective it is for him to continually cite a sort of left of center policy group as that. I don't know how, quoting statistics from a think tank doesn't necessarily resonate with viewers.
The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives always comes out with very socially progressive, very left-wing
And they did say the
ideas.
Liberals were a better or more fiscally responsible party than the other two parties this time.
Is it possible, the NDP are saying this, from the economists and business people you've spoken with, for a government to balance a budget in a single mandate in 4 years?
I mean, we are on that track, and I don't know where that deficit is right
They could
now.
have balanced the budget this year if they did not give away the money in those checks.
But
The budget would be
promising to
balanced
give,
now.
but also promising to keep giving away those checks, and also to recruit the 300 healthcare workers that we're still not sure where those people are going to come from, where physically the healthcare workers the NDP wants to bring in will be, while making those expenditures effectively, right? How realistic does that seem?
Again, it's a tough question, right? I mean, we have the Tories saying economic growth is going to be it, but they're planning to balance the budget within 2 years, and once all these Tory tax cuts come into effect, it's about $1 billion. It's going to take 4 years.
I don't feel
It's
like
tough.
rigid fiscal responsibility is necessarily a strength of either of those parties in terms, and I believe that's why I stated earlier that Lamont has some credibility in making that statement. I want to bring up something else here that I noted, and that simply the way they were delivering their messages. And this seems facile, perhaps, maybe in this day and age where we complain our politicians are too fake, too practiced, too polished, but at that end, those final statements, Stephenson, she's been a premier for a year and a half, she's reading off her notes, she's looking down, people online going, she's appealing to her shoes, yet Canoe staring out at the camera. Now, he'll just turn and stare at the camera all the time, even during press conferences. We're kind of wondering, who is he talking to? Is he talking to us?
He's talking to the people at home. He's a former reporter who knows how to play the media. He knows how to talk to the camera. He knows how to ad-lib. He's a gifted performer, and that showed tonight.
Very different strategy that way. Although he wasn't a gifted performer in terms of being loosey-goosey, firing shots. True. We didn't really hear anything. Ian, do you?
Yeah, I think actually, if I'm remembering correctly, in 2019, Mr. Canoe would interrupt Mr. Palliser, and that's actually a noted point this time around, is that he kind of did take a step back. That does perhaps give off the premier-like sort of aura that you want if you are fighting for this job.
If he were to interrupt Mr. Palliser, as he had with Mr. Palliser in the past, that would harken back to sort of the idea that he might be aggressive. Is that what you're saying? There are certain things Wab Kinew does not want people to think, that he is someone who has a temper, that he is someone who could be aggressive. These are things that the PCs have tried in the past to play up as reasons you shouldn't like him.
Speaking of things Wab Kinew did not want, Stephenson surprised me when she went early on the landfill question. Yeah. That was her first question, and the PCs intend to use this and are using it as a wedge issue. It would be fair to describe it as such.
Absolutely. Like there's a television commercial on it. Like, again, this is a controversial issue, but when she's bringing it up on her own, it suggests the party has the polling to suggest that people are on their side.
Want to say this at the doorstep to say, perhaps they're saying, vote for the NDP. Wab Kinew will spend a pile of money on this search, and maybe it's all about money. One thing and the other thing is the absence, something Kinew didn't say. What I was surprised is when he blamed our crime problem on drugs and addictions. Well, crime, drugs, addictions, crime is also, as we all know, a determinant of it is poverty. A determinant of it is institutional racism. We have a person who could be the First Nations Premier of Manitoba, when asked to talk about crime, did not mention institutional racism at all. It is almost as if, by not talking about the landfill, by the party not wishing to raise the landfill, by identifying this as a wedge issue, and then now not mentioning the legacy of residential schools, only Dougald Lamont was talking about Indigenous issues tonight in that manner. And that is surprising, I guess, when you think of where Mr. Kinew comes from, but not surprising in terms of a strategy, I suppose.
Yeah, he has not wanted to bring it up. Again, he could be the First Nations Premier. There's no NDP billboards, advertising that fact.
Not since his speech has he brought it up, the famous speech earlier in the election.
Yeah. I mean, he said, I think we asked about a week ago, about racism, and he's just like, I'm not here to be a First Nations Premier. I'm here to be a Premier for all Manitobans. It's not an issue he wants to get into too much.
Okay.
We have 3 minutes left, gentlemen, I'm being told.
And I tend to, talk too much. Ian, is there anything else I want to bring up?
Again, apologies if you touched on this earlier. Again, I wrote really detailed notes. Stephenson saying stay tuned on when asked about a PST cut. and said that that could be something that we'll do down the road. She put stay tuned. Stay tuned is a language we've heard from her before.
Stay tuned if she's elected. That's
Stay
how
tuned
I
if
took
she's
that.
elected, yes, but also
She said not right now, but stay
not
tuned.
right now, but even opening the door to it, I thought was quite interesting.
Remember, Pallister always wanted to be equal, at least with Saskatchewan,
Yes.
in terms of the tax regime.
Well, that would help with encouraging 2 million people to be our final population, right?
Yeah. And
We've
maybe
got to
also-
make it
no
more
evidence-
economically, yeah.
There's no evidence that anybody moves specific, unless you're a very wealthy person, you're a professional athlete, considering you're an NHL free agent, you consider what regime you want to go to, you might want to go to an American regime with very low
But
taxes.
she says, you know, you want to like compare it, we're going to have a tax regime like Alberta, and people quote that as something they love about Alberta.
I was mentioning on
2
Mr.
minutes.
Canoe looking premier-like at moments in his delivery, but I feel Mrs. Stephenson did that at points too, in her opening and closing statements in kind of that optimistic, I'm the cheerleader for the province, I believe in Manitoba. That could play well.
It is a shame that she wasn't able to look in the camera, you know, for her supporters at the end in those final statements. Speaking of final statements.
Yeah, it's ultimately no knockout punches. Oh, I'll do this. I'll look straight into the camera. Come on, give me a close-up.
Oh,
That's
not me,
Ian.
not me.
That's
There we go.
Ian.
There we go.
That's Ian. I honestly think that there were no knockout punches here. Everyone wants to know, is there a knockout moment? The Alberta election, the NDP was out ahead, and then a couple of weeks later, the UCP wins, and a debate had a lot to do with it. This was not that debate, in my opinion. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, all three had good moments, and they have things to show for it. Does it change the course of the election? Probably not.
So the big surprise for you, Ian, was the fact that Stephenson brought up the landfill search first.
Yeah,
Any other big surprises?
And frankly, Stephenson's sort of, softball questions to Lamont too, in an attempt to.
That's just good
attack-
strategy.
It's
That's
good
just-
strategy. It's good strategy. But
Canoe, Canoe
it
can't
worked.
interrupt. He can't say anything. She gets to get another person to attack Canoe. It's just smart.
Yeah.
There you go. It's just smart. So was there a winner, guys?
Ooh.
Not in my opinion, no.
No.
I don't know if Mr. Lamont did anything to raise his third-tier status, but I don't think there's a big winner or a big loser. I think to me, I would feel like it's a kind of a status quo situation.
I mean, for the NDP, they talk about healthcare all the time, every day of the campaign. Here, it was only a third of the debate, right? So, they're perhaps, the PCs have some strengths in affordability, and they were able to show that. Again, I think I'm with you, Bart. No real knockout punches here.
Ian Froese, Bartley Kives, thank you for joining us for
You're
this
more than
analysis
welcome.
tonight. Thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you tomorrow night at 6. And of course, we've got your next local newscast coming up at 11 on CBC Television. See you later.